Good afternoon. My name is Paul McIntosh, and I have the immense pleasure of sitting in the company of Brother Jamal Joseph, author of Panther Baby, his most recent work, a memoir. This conversation takes place in the village of Wadley. It is rather personal with me, and it's personal because you may not recall this, but having read Panther Baby, it's my understanding that you left Leavenworth circa 1987. I came to New York around that time, 1988, 89, and I had taken a job as a librarian at PS 194, which is about 10 blocks from here. And I remember the first occasion for my meeting you. I was going upstairs to the library, which happened to be on the 3rd floor, and you were coming down with your wife. And you embraced me with your spirit. I was new to the city. I didn't really know anybody. I'm basically a country boy. I grew up in cotton fields and outhouses and water taken from wells. So there was a certain amount of uneasiness when I came here, although I'd been away to school. When I came here, I hadn't quite found my groove, so to speak. But when I saw you on that stairwell, there was something about your spirit which just embraced me. Fast forward. I was hired at Touro College to be the evening librarian. Only knew your name. I was putting some things away and I came across, it was a jacket with your name on it. It was a video jacket, Jamal Joseph. And it didn't occur to me until this morning that the title of that piece was Smoothism.
Right.
Having watched Smoothism, I began to do some research about you and found out that you were a member of the Panther 21. Subsequent to that, I was on 116th Street, and again, I saw you and your spirit embraced me. And I asked you if you would come to Wadley to speak to some young brothers and sisters. This was about 10 years ago when I first got here. And of course, as you always do, you graciously came and you spoke to those young men and women, and of course, it goes without saying that you changed their lives as you have changed my life. So I consider this a sacred occasion. There are just a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. It's always a struggle to try and get young people to understand that we come from a great and glorious legacy. We come from a great and glorious people. We stand on your shoulders. We stand on the shoulders of Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, all those brothers and sisters who fought and struggled and died. What would you say to those young people who are trying to make their way in the world today? And how would you contrast that with what you experienced when you left Harlem and having come back here?
For young people, Dr. King put it so well when he talked about dreams. And the idea that there is no price tag on dreams, there's no expiration date on dreams, and that there is nothing that can really stop, impede, channel, and restrain a great imagination. So I encourage young people to be dreamers and then also to be visionaries. Visionaries are people who dream wide awake. They dream with their eyes open. They see themselves differently, they imagine themselves differently, and they imagine the world around them differently. I love to tell them stories about people who came from humble beginnings, who were poor, who were black, who were men, who were women, who grew up to change their lives and to help change the world. So I encourage them to do that. And in order to do that, there's something that young people need to have, and this is this idea of safe space. When I was with an organization named City Kids, we talked about safe space. It's also the guiding principle of impact. And that is, first of all, to be physically safe. So no bullying, no threats, no fighting. To be safe to be who they are. To express their ideas without somebody saying that they're stupid, they're ugly, they're untalented, and to be safe to imagine and to dream. Toward that end, it is being around people who celebrate you. I told a story earlier today that Reverend Run told about growing up in his neighborhood and This is Reverend Run for Run DMC, and people telling him he couldn't play basketball, he wasn't a good poet, he couldn't rhyme. So what he did was he found some real friends. He says, maybe these are not my friends. And he learned to go where he was celebrated, not where he was tolerated. 3 steps to that, quite simply, is to dream big, and then to adopt a mentor. A lot of times young people wait for a mentor to come and go that you're special. I encourage people, and I heard Barbara Jordan say this years ago, this is how I learned it. Congressman Barbara Jordan talked about the fact that when she got to a particular university or when she got to Washington, she'd look around and she'd adopt a mentor. She'd go up to them. So to adopt a mentor, to dream, to have a dream that's bigger than themselves and bigger than their own reality, to create their own truth. You can create a new truth even inside of a bad reality. And then to always remember to give back, because reaching back and giving service becomes the foundation to help remind you of who you are and the kind of world that we're in.
You know, as I look at you, and again I reflect on the genesis of my relationship with you, and undoubtedly there are many people who could say the very same things to you that I would say. I've always been gratified that whenever I've invited someone into this space, and I don't know if I've ever really thanked you properly. I mean, I honestly don't know if I have. Whenever I've asked you, you've always been unequivocal. You've always been Johnny on the spot, as they say. I know that you're a filmmaker. You're an activist. You're a poet. You're a playwright. You're a man of substance. How can we help the young people in the villages of Harlem in the context of your having come of age as a Panther Baby? I know in the book you mentioned that when you left, you were carrying guns for a righteous cause. You had the books you had read. But when you came out of Leavenworth, you saw all these brothers who were rolling with Tech 9s. They had the guns. They had far more weapons than the Panthers ever had, but they didn't have the knowledge. How can we, or what can you say to help those of us who are trying to make a difference? What would you say to us to try and help us to let those young people understand that it is about knowledge?
Absolutely. Well, the first piece is a very important observation. When Huey and Bobby founded the Black Panther Party, they patrolled the streets of Oakland, California with shotguns and law books. And as Bobby Seale says, because those were the dynamic weapons of social change. But Mr. Seale now says that if they were founding the Panthers today, that Panthers would still be out on the street in the midst of it, in the thick of it, but that they would be carrying not shotguns and law books, but video cameras and laptop computers, because these are the dynamic weapons of social change. So we need to kind of recognize that something that seemed like a solution in the 1960s has become an epidemic in the new millennium. As Harry Belafonte said, the streets are running red with the blood of our young men. And that is because what happened in movement days was that the first thing they armed was your mind, and they did it with books. When I went to the Panther office thinking I was going to get a gun, I left with a stack of books. Then they got more books and more books. And this social justice education, this political education, is what made me a warrior, a trooper, and a true Panther, and it's what made the Black Panther Party a threat, as J. Edgar Hoover said, the greatest threat to the internal security of America. What bothered him the most when he testified, when you look before Congress, and when you look at Hoover's records, was not the guns, it was a breakfast program, and it was the liberation schools, feeding the young and arming the minds of the young. Those of us who work with young people, there are two things that we have to keep in mind. One, again, is something that I heard Maya Angelou say years ago. I was in prison, but I was watching through the bars a television broadcast of a program called Soul that was hosted by the late, great Ellis Hazlett. And she talked about what it was to be a parent. And she said what she realized about parenting is that she didn't have to be perfect, but she needed to be available. So the first thing I would say is that let's not worry about being perfect, but let's worry about being available. And that has to do with consistency. The reason why I'm here at Wadley is because this is frontline work. What you do, what Mr. Maine does, what the teachers do, what Mr. Chen is doing, it's frontline work because you're here every day, continuing the work. And that's what pays off. Listen, the drug dealers are there every day. The gangbangers are there every day. We have to be more insistent and more persistent. We have to be those other voices. And the other thing is not to give up. I was walking through Harlem last summer and with my son who's in graduate school at Columbia, and a young man who was about 35 years old was standing by a bus stop. He said, "Mr. Joseph, how are you?" And I said, "I'm good." He said, "You don't remember me?" And I said, and I'm trying to, I do what we do, what mentors do, trying to smile and go, "I remember." He said, no, you don't remember me. He said, "You came to a program and you were teaching a theater arts workshop, but you mixed a lot of other stuff in it years ago." He said, "And I was one of the kids in the program." He said, "I was a knucklehead." And I said, "No." He said, "No, trust me, I was a knucklehead, but you didn't give up. And here's the thing, that stuff didn't kick in then, but it kicked in a little bit later." He says, "And I'm a father now, and I'm a youth counselor now, and I want to thank you." So sometimes we'll get discouraged. We might, we live in a society of instant gratification, instant coffee, fast food, everything on the spot. Sometimes this work takes a while. Sometimes painting a masterpiece takes a while. Sometimes, as a young man from the South, sometimes getting a field in shape, forget about getting a particular crop, but our elders used to understand we can't even plant in that field just yet. We've got to do work for a couple of seasons to get it ready and then plant that crop. Sometimes even preparing the field to plant the seed takes a while, but if we don't give up, we're going to see some wonderful fruit in our young people.
Listen to you, there's a quote, I think it's Simon Bolivia. He said, "All oppression creates a state of war." And I think black people, and many others also, but black people have been in a state of war ever since we've come to these shores. You mentioned in the book, for example, that it's cheaper to send a person to Harvard or Yale than it is, to keep them incarcerated. But yet, as you mentioned in the book also, I think Russia formerly held the largest number of prisoners, followed by South Africa. And I think, as you mentioned in the book again, the United States has the highest number of people incarcerated. And those prisoners look like you and I. You mentioned also that with the gentrification, for example, that's occurring in Harlem, oftentimes some of the young people that you deal with at Impact, they're having difficulty in just making ends meet. Their parents are getting food just to give them some sustenance. In light of this kind of a reality, is there anything that we perhaps can do differently? There's a black president now, and oftentimes people say that we live in a post-racial society. I don't subscribe to that perspective, but there's my words, a kind of confusion that we still unfortunately are part of. And in speaking to you, I'm really looking for answers. Not that you're the omni-cure-all, but I'm hoping that some kernel of truth can be provided, and those young brothers and sisters that have an opportunity to see you can partake of that. Is there anything that you can perhaps in parting say to us? And lastly, you mention again in the book that love is really the commodity that will change the world. Love is what makes us want to give service to others. I don't know if I'm clear in indicating those two questions to you, or posing those two perspectives, but I just want to try and get you to react to them in any way that you choose to do so.
Yeah, those are great observations. This constant state of war, from the horrors of slavery to the Middle Passage to being enslaved, and then the whole idea of neocolonialism. What H. Rap Brown would say in terms of the fact that the chains have been taken off of our wrists and our ankles and placed on our minds. So the first thing that we have to do is to understand how to stop the battle with ourselves. One of the things that happens with oppression is that people who are really sophisticated about oppression understand how to make us oppress ourselves, to become instruments of our own oppression, our own degradation. We begin to mimic the power structure and the powers that be, not only in terms of thinking, yes, capitalism is good, and we become cheap and enslaved versions of that, but also to physically and emotionally oppress ourselves. So we don't need a slave master with a whip telling us that we're dumb niggers, that we can't do anything. We're doing it to each other. So we have to stop that battle and that war within ourselves. And that comes out of love. The Panther Party talked about that. So it's something that's having come out of the Baptist tradition, the Black Southern Baptist tradition, where I heard all of that from Grandma and Grandpa, but then came to the Panther office and saw this poster of Che Guevara that said, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, let me say that revolutionaries are guided by great feelings of love. The anger that we were feeling was channeled constructively in the sense of saying, that fighting and that cussing and that razor swinging that you're doing, don't do it to your brother, because he's in the same bag you are. Let's fight the system. And in identifying that, we became more of men. We thought being men was beating each other up. How about taking on the biggest bully on the block and the biggest bully in the world? And how about understanding that the greatest thing you can lay your life down for is not over some dice or street corner or some woman that you both think that you're chasing, but for your community, love of the community. And I saw men and women elevated by that realization, by that refocus, by that retooling. We're naturally a loving people. So that's the kind of focus that we need in struggle and a kind of recalibration. It's always great to remember that you are part of a cause that's greater than yourself. And sometimes those of us that do what we do have to remind ourselves. It's not easy to get out of bed every morning with so much pain around us and so much suffering, and then the personal things that people are going through. But the thing that always gets me going is I sit and I remember that there is a cause greater than myself. I'm part of something bigger. We're part of a movement that's bigger. We're part of a transformation that's more than the 60s, that's more than the anti-slavery movement, that's going to be more than this battle against mass incarceration. It is a call for love and worldwide humanity, and all of our great leaders recognize the humanity in kind of other folks. That manifests one-to-one, person to person. That manifests with acts of sacrifice and kindness to somebody in your family, to somebody in your community. If you can't take it on in a greater sense that as some people are able to do, in one sense you can remember that my contribution to the cause greater than myself is mentoring this young person or checking on this senior. And knowing that in the movement we used to say, not everybody's going to be a Panther, not everybody's going to be a frontline soldier, but we need people of consciousness to do what they do well. And in that sense, we need teachers to teach, we need bakers to bake, we need builders to build, we need doctors to heal, but to do it with a revolutionary consciousness, a human consciousness, that I'm not doing this for commerce, and I'm not doing this for glory, but I'm doing this because I am part of a community and a family and a cause greater than myself.
Perhaps when we revisit this conversation, there's some characters and some stories in this book that I'd like you to share with those who would perhaps see or read the book. And one of them is Angel, someone that you mentioned and unfortunately was killed when he was 13. Or even Andre, the young man that was killed in your building. I mention those because I dare say that this book, Panther Baby, is such a timely and necessary work that I would hope that everyone who sees this DVD, or if they have a chance to see it on YouTube, that you would take the time to read Panther Baby. And my brother, on behalf of the entire village of Wadley, I thank you for coming here. And yes, sir.
On this thing of, and I don't know how we edit it or if we need to, this thing of love, I want to relate it back to the Panther Party, because people always see those images of the Panthers standing down the cops, looking so strong and fearless with those Panther uniforms on, boldly marching into the face of danger. And this is all true. But I want to say what animated that. What was the heartbeat of that? And this is a quiz that I want anybody who sees this DVD to ask. If you see anyone who says that they were a former Panther, or we have people who will say that, you know, my aunt, my uncle, my parents, my grandparents, ask them to ask this person this question. Ask them what we were motivated by the most. Ask them what was the one thing that we were taught above all other things. If you will, what we were brainwashed to believe. And tell them, don't talk about the 10-point program, don't talk about the rules of discipline, everything that we studied. You probably don't even need to say that. If you ask this question, they will answer it like this. They will say, we were taught to love and serve the people, mind, body, and spirit. And it's love that would make you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, when it was freezing. Because we didn't have special housing because we were Panthers. We lived in those same tenements that didn't have heat and hot water, that would make you get out of the bed at 5 in the morning to go across town to cook breakfast for 30 kids, 50, 100 kids that weren't your kids. It would be love that would make you help those elderly up and down the steps and do those community patrols. And it would be love that when you were exhausted, having worked an 18-hour day as a Panther, and you're on the bus going home, and you see out the window of the bus, the cops have somebody against the wall with a gun in their face, makes you get off the bus and stand between that brother and that sister who you didn't know, who you hadn't met before, but who you understood was your brother and sister, to risk your life. It wasn't boldness or badness or fearlessness, it was love.
In the words of Cornel West, you can't lead the people if you don't love the people.
Yes.
You can't save the people if you don't serve the people.
That's right.
So my brother, I thank you for being here.
Thank you, brother. I thank you.